Welcome, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to view this program about a very delicate topic, the pain inflicted as a result of sexual abuse of minors by clergy. It's very important for us all to come face to face with the victims of these horrific acts. By doing so, we connect to their pain and to the opportunities we have to support them in healing. Together we can, as the church, call on the healing power of God. We've all been taught to take our burdens and our sorrows to the Lord for healing, for help, and for consolation. I know that this scandal has shaken all of us and tested us. An important trust has been violated, and the pain has been overwhelming for victims, their families, and loved ones. The scandal has affected all of us in the church. You're gathered to reflect on the ways we can reach out to victims, move forward together in faith, and build a stronger church. Why don't we start appropriately with a prayer? Loving Father, be with us as we seek your healing grace. Show us how to be compassionate. Give us the strength to face painful truths. Share with us your mercy. Forgive us and guide us. Watch over us as we work our way through the pain of the events that have so dramatically challenged us. Fill us with hope for a stronger future. Reveal to us the ways in which we can serve one another in this ministry of healing. Protect and heal us, Lord, in the holy name of Jesus. Amen. Peace be with all of you.
The following presentation is made possible by the Marquette University Law School and its Restorative Justice Initiative. It is an effort to address the issue of sexual abuse by clergy in ways that support victims and communities through the healing process. The content of this documentary is sensitive. The stories told were recorded in November 2006 during a healing circle for people whose lives have been deeply affected by the acts of abuse and the ripple effects of the scandal. Contact information for services available to anyone suffering from the aftermath of abuse is included on the resources page of our website, healingcirclegroup.com. Now from the Marquette University Law School in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Distinguished Professor of Law, Janine Geske.
It is a quiet evening here in Eisenberg Memorial Hall at the Marquette University Law School. This room is normally a quiet place for study and reflection. Hello, my name is Janine Geske, and I am the director of the Marquette University Law School Restorative Justice Initiative. In the recent past, this room was the setting for a special meeting of people whose lives have been deeply impacted by the clergy sex abuse scandal in the Catholic Church. Some of those who sat in these very chairs were victims. Others were impacted indirectly, but all had experienced what I call the ripple effect of the abuse. In just a few moments, you'll meet some of the participants in that circle and hear their stories. But first, I want to tell you a little about myself, about what my hope was in facilitating the Restorative Justice Circle, and why I believe viewing portions of that process is so important. My work here at the law school is to teach mediation and to facilitate dialogues between victims and offenders of various kinds of crimes. In what seems like a former life, I was a lawyer and a circuit court judge. I also had the privilege of serving on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Perhaps my most challenging work to date has been as a mediator of claims made by survivors of sexual abuse by clergy against the Milwaukee Archdiocese. Most of the time, those mediations were between the victims and representatives of the respective archdiocese or religious order. Usually, they involve negotiating some type of financial settlement. But the sessions also gave abuse victims a chance to tell the church authorities what happened to them and how those actions impacted their entire lives. Those sessions gave me the idea for a healing circle that included a larger group. We brought together victims, an offender priest, pastors and staff from area parishes, the Archbishop of Milwaukee, therapists, and lay people for a session that we videotaped to share with you, with parishes, seminaries, victims groups, and other community organizations. Our goal was to help the larger community reflect on and better understand the breadth and depth of the harm stemming from the sexual abuse scandal. This tape is an edited version of that 4-hour dialogue. I'm grateful to everyone who participated in the Healing Circle. We couldn't include all of them in this tape, but let me introduce you now to the people whose stories you'll hear first. Carol, a wife and mother who speaks for her son Steve. At just 18 years of age, Steve took his own life in the aftermath of sexual abuse by a priest at his high school. This tragic story reminds us of the deep suffering that victims internalize and the despair that can result. Father John, a Capuchin priest responsible for investigating the claims of sexual abuse within his order. In the circle, he reveals that he was approached inappropriately while in seminary and provides us with insights into the guilt, fear, and psychological damage that even a single event can cause. Mary, a woman coming of age in the 1950s and 60s, who was the victim of sexual abuse by a parish priest at the age of 12. Her story of confusing the abuse with the possibility of love becomes even more traumatic when the blame for the abuse is placed on her. Ralph, a man whose mother placed him and several siblings in an orphanage following the death of their father. At the orphanage, Ralph, one of his brothers, and several friends were the victims of sexual abuse by a priest responsible for their care. These are some of the survivors. As you listen, remember that the victims of abuse were children, and the impact has lasted for decades.
The day that we adopted our first son at 10 weeks of age was probably one of the happiest days of our lives. My husband and I were thrilled to bring this little boy home. He was 10 weeks old, and very grateful that someone chose to give up a child rather than have an abortion so that we could become parents, which we desperately wanted to be. Let me go back. We adopted another son 2.5 years later. We sent both of our boys to Catholic school. As far as I was concerned, there was no other education. It had to be a Catholic education. I was brought up Catholic. I was raised by a grandmother who was at Mass and receiving Holy Communion every day of her life. So there was no question that these boys were going to go to attend a parochial school, and we were very satisfied with that. When high school time came for Steve, we decided that he would go to a parochial high school. And actually, I have to admit that I'm the one that pushed that. My husband could have gone either way at that point because financially some sacrifices were going to have to be made to afford the Catholic high school education. But I just said, I can work part-time, I can pick up extra hours, whatever. Let's go with the Catholic high school, and we did. My son became friends with a priest who was a teacher at the high school. He taught religion, religious ethics. He was very involved in the freshman orientation. Parents loved him because of his interaction with the students. I liked him. I thought it was perfectly safe for my son to go to this priest's home. He lived in an apartment with at least 4 other priests, including the principal of the high school. So I saw no harm in going to this priest's house on a Friday evening to play games on the computer or talk or whatever with a group of boys. We started seeing changes in our son by his sophomore year. I leaned toward, maybe he's having to deal with the fact that he's adopted now. And maybe we need to get some help. And we did. We went the gamut on help. From psychologists to psychiatrists to social worker to you name it, we did it. It didn't work. We realized that he was involved in using drugs, and we got him into treatment because the law in Wisconsin says that at age 14, you can't make your child stay in treatment. I don't know if the law has changed since then. He kept saying he didn't have a problem and he refused to stay. So after a couple of times in treatment, he left. Finally, we got him into treatment at age 18, and he left and took his life. During this time, we were becoming suspicious, especially after the funeral we were becoming suspicious because a teacher attended his funeral who said, "I wish I had listened more. I wish I had paid more attention. I'm going to write a letter to the principal," and she named the principal of the school, "and tell him how badly I feel." A coach said, "I wish I would have paid more attention." A counselor said, my husband and I talked to the principal of this school. The priest, the offender, attended the funeral along with a group of boys. We talked to the principal, and it was just like we weren't able to get any answers, or maybe it's because we didn't want to believe that it was something like this, and we were in such deep grief. I cannot tell you what a nightmare it was to have to bury your child. I mean, it's every parent's worst nightmare, and I feel that the worst that could have possibly happened to me in my lifetime has already happened. There is nothing that could cause my family more pain. My 15-year-old son had a terrible time dealing with it. This morning I was reflecting on back to that time, and one of my most painful memories, Steve is buried in what you would call more of a small rural cemetery. And my husband would put the lawnmower on the weekends in the back of the trunk of the car, tie it down with bungee cords, tie the trunk down, and drive to the cemetery to mow the grass on Steve's grave because he didn't think the cemetery was doing a good enough job. He would wash the gravestone. This was the only plot in the whole cemetery that was manicured. There was never a weed. There was never grass growing around the stone. Everything was trimmed neatly. He did this for approximately 2 years, and the only thing I can think of is that that was his only way of still being able to do something for his son. It pained me so to watch him do this, pull the car out of the garage, put this lawnmower in the car, and sometimes my 15-year-old would go with him to do this, to take care of the gravesite. A person, someone who we did not know. At first, there were all kinds of flowers, mementos at the gravesite. But the years went on, and a couple years later, my younger son and I decided to write a note. Someone was leaving all kinds of wreaths and floral arrangements at the gravesite. And my son Mike said, well, why don't we leave a note and ask this person? Because we knew it was none of Steve's friends or anyone that we knew. We had asked, so we did. We wrote a note, we put it in a baggie and tied it to the wreath that this person had left, and asked if they would be willing to share, and left our phone number. We never heard anything. And years went by and this continued. This person obviously visited this grave even more often than we did. I mean, it was Easter and Steve's birthday and the anniversary of his death and a fall theme and a Christmas wreath, and we had no idea who this person was. I don't know why. After my husband retired, and this is like 13 years later, one morning as I was leaving for work, he said, "What do you think if I'm going out to the cemetery? What would you think if I put a note on that wreath and just one more time?" And I said, if that's what you want to do, it's okay. It's fine with me. And he did. And a month later, we got a response to that note, and it was from the priest telling us that he was the person that had been placing these floral arrangements for almost 14 years and visiting Steve's grave. But the letter was all about him and his problems with his order, not understanding him, and about that he had attempted to take his life. And so he knew how Steve must have felt, and that he would continue to visit this grave so that Steve would know that he would never be forgotten by anyone other than his family. I have a cousin who is a therapist. We shared this letter with her because my husband and I both had, I can't explain it, but we both read this letter and thought, there is something wrong with this letter. There's something doesn't feel right. So we talked with my cousin. I contacted a person who had tried so desperately to help us with Steve, with the problems. And she had been a former nun, and she said she didn't have a good feeling about this. Well, to shorten the story a little bit, this priest had been accused of molesting boys, of providing alcohol and drugs in his apartment. We managed to get to the bottom of it. We managed to confront him. And although he admits to, yes, smoking pot, providing alcohol, being a pedophile, he still says, but I never laid a hand on Steve. He was different. Well, I'm sorry. From Bluemount Avenue in Wauwatosa to my son's grave is quite a distance. And to spend that much time at that gravesite and then tell us that, yes, he did have pot and alcohol and that he was a pedophile tells me there's some guilt there. And I do not believe that he did not do anything. I also still have letters, which I've read this morning, that he would send to Steve when he was on retreat, wanting him to stop by, wanting him to go to a movie with him, things like that. I still have those. No one chooses their journey in life, and I certainly would have not chosen this journey, but I feel I'm here today for a reason. I think my son needs his mother to speak for him.
The first inkling I had that anybody would ever abuse a child or whatever was when my parents, kind of gave us the warning to stay away from strangers and people who would give you stuff and ask you to go with them and things like that. And I never had any conception, I guess, that a priest or a religious would ever be among those types of people. I think in part because priests in my life were such a great role model, not only the ones I knew personally, but the ones who I saw in our community, like Father Grappi, and my family was always talking about Father Grappi. I decided to explore a vocation, and my dad happened to have one of his dental patients was a Capuchin, the father of a Capuchin friar, and told me about a school near Fond du Lac called St. Lawrence Seminary, which after my brother and I went, I have a twin brother, went there for a weekend visit, we decided that we wanted to attend. And I guess about 3 or 4 weeks after I got there, one of the friars who was a teacher there, I'll just leave it at that, he came up to me and grabbed me in a way that I wasn't comfortable with. He had alcohol in his breath, and I basically just stayed away from him. For the next 3 years, I had to have him for class a couple times, but I would make it my practice to avoid him, and I never told anybody what happened. I just figured he was weird, and it wasn't the type of thing that I really wanted to discuss with anybody. I guess why that's relevant is that years later, after I had become a friar and made my first profession, in the winter of 1992, right before Christmas, there was a series of articles in the local paper here in Milwaukee about abuse that had gone on at the seminary, a good part of it while I was a student there, and some of it perpetrated by this priest, this friar, who's since passed. It was something that I never really came to terms with until I ended up going into treatment for alcoholism and eating disorders in St. Louis, maybe 8 years after this thing happened with him. I feel very, I guess you might call it survivor's guilt in some sense, that I was able to escape what could have been a very bad situation for me personally, and I've met other people who, for one reason or another, couldn't be in that situation and have been tremendously harmed by it. I feel a sense of loss.
When I was in 7th grade and felt the attention of our parish priest, I felt honored and valued to be the recipient of attention from such an important person. And at the age of 12, I fell in love with a priest. I looked to him for comfort and attention and caring. And I received with excitement his love letters and read them until they were cottony and hid them in my dresser drawer where only I put things. It took some time for me to become, or for me to move beyond a point of excitement and need for this relationship to a point of confusion and needing to talk to someone about it. So I went to a nun who had been my fourth grade teacher, and I had just, she was my favorite nun, favorite teacher, and I had confided in her before. And I talked to her about being introduced to, now I want to say that differently. I talked to her about being in love. I talked to her about sexual feelings I had never experienced before that were exciting and pleasurable. And I asked her if what I was feeling was wrong, or was it okay? How could a priest have a relationship like this and still be celibate? By this time, I was in the 8th grade. And I don't remember her responses to me during that conversation. The next day, she told me that she wanted me to meet with the pastor of our parish. This was in 1960. And I went up to our school library at St. Elizabeth's and walked into the library, which in my memory was a huge place. But I know now, after revisiting it, it isn't that huge. And I remember the pastor sitting behind a table, and he looked huge too, with his dark hair and dark beard and flowing cassock. And I remember him fingering the rope cinch in his lap and swinging his crossed foot over his leg. And I told him what the sister had told me to say, and that was that I was only a child, and I was confused by what I was feeling and by this relationship with the priest. And he looked at me and said, "You're old enough to seduce a priest." And I remember feeling kind of lost at that point. And the priest walked into the library while I was there with the pastor. And he walked up beside me and knelt before the pastor, genuflected, and asked for a blessing. and the pastor blessed him. And my memory from that point becomes very spotted, and I had a sensation, or I remember watching these people, these three people in this room, from above me, and noticing what they were doing, but not being able to hear what the conversation was or the words spoken. And there was a blackness that enveloped me. There isn't a rape kit for that, now or then, for that experience. And I went home, and I can't even be sure if it was the same day or exact sequence, but I came upon my parents reading my love letters, and my father responding to me with, "Do you want to be a whore? Is that what you want to be, is a whore?" And my mother saying, "How could you do this to us? How could you do this? What's everyone gonna think?" And from that time on, I continued going to Mass and communion and confession. And I don't remember what I said, and I don't remember I don't remember any of it other than I was a good Catholic. I was a good Catholic until I went to a therapist in my 40s, and I told her that I had seduced a priest when I was 12 and 13 and 14. And she said to me, "Mary, you could have danced naked before him and it would not have been your fault." And I couldn't understand what that meant. It's totally foreign to me.
First and largest reason why I'm here is because I'm here for Ronald, Richard, and Mark. They can't be here because they committed suicide over what happened to them as being molested from the priests when they were younger, because they found out from their families at their funerals. And I thought that the only way for me to recover out of this and my healing process is to be helping fellow boys that happened to when we were younger, to go through the process and get the healing started, because I'm finding by helping these other boys, which are men now, I'm healing myself. Oh yeah, and when you're a little boy like that, you think that, oh my God, what did I do here? How did I get this guy to treat me so special? I thought I was the only guy. Well, I found out not to be true. When I went to the priest's funeral, I went there because I wanted to see some of the sisters from the orphanage, some of the boys. And my younger brother leaned over and he says, "You know, Ralphie, he did it to me too." And I went, "What? What are you talking about?" I mean, I'm in a church of probably 400 or 500 religious people, and I almost went up there and tipped the poor priest's casket over, because that's how I felt at that moment. And I said, besides, what I'm going to do instead of that, I'm going to go and help all the guys that need it, because I was always like the leader of the pack in the orphanage. The Sister Florence used to tell me, Ralphie, you have to lead these boys in the path of God and quit leading them down the wrong way. And there was quite a few instances where, I don't want to get into it right here, how she caught me in that response, but I was the leader, all right. Well, anyway, and I've got to know, but I'm running out of guys to help here, and I'm really worried that when I run out of friends, or brothers in some respect, that I won't have anybody to help. I don't know what I'm going to be doing from then on, and I'm not looking forward to that day.
Now that you've sat in on part of the healing circle, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the process itself, which is based on a Native American tradition. In restorative justice, we gather people who have caused the harm, been harmed, and members of the larger community. Participants listen as each person in the circle describes the impact of what has occurred. The process is simple. The group sits in a circle. A candle is placed on a table in the center of the room to signify bringing the truth to light. And we use a talking piece, in this case a rock. The talking piece is passed from person to person, allowing each individual to speak from his or her heart. It symbolizes the respect due to the person talking. As long as the speaker holds the rock, no one can interrupt. As you've seen, it is an incredibly moving experience to participate in this process. The first rule for conducting one of these circles is that it should be victim-focused. That's why we started by sharing their stories with you. Now we will hear from 3 other participants in the circle: a youth minister, a priest offender, and a parish priest whose work gives him a perspective on why the scandal has been so difficult for people to discuss. Mike works in youth ministry at a parish. He came to the circle to describe his anger over the discovery that one of the parish priests was abusing some of the boys who were participants in the youth programs. That revelation, coupled with a memory of being approached by a priest during his own formative years, proves to be an emotional combination. Then we meet another Mike, a former priest who acknowledges being an offender. His story begins with an incident at his very first parish assignment. Mike takes us through his admission of guilt, his confession, and in later years, his request for counseling. After completing treatment and returning to parish life, the clergy abuse scandal becomes public, and in an act that angers him, he is removed from the priesthood. Father Jim is a pastor for 2 parishes. He serves on the review board for the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, and in that role reviews the sexual abuse cases filed against his brother priests. In the circle, he shares his insights into why the scandal has been so difficult for people in the church to acknowledge, and why the voices of the victims need to be heard. These 3 stories help us to think about the consequences of a single act of abuse, the difficulties involved in confronting it, and the challenges of both telling the truth and hearing it.
My mid-20s, I was in Janesville at a parish, and the associate pastor, priest, had a separate apartment. The youth ministry religious office was in what used to be the convent in the basement, and his quarters was upstairs. And oftentimes he would come through in the mid-afternoon and say hi or whatever, and oftentimes mid-afternoon he was drunk. Not just drinking, but, drunk. And my nature is to be caring and not to ignore problems, and a bit naive. I followed, he went up to his apartment, and I thought for a few minutes. I went up and knocked on his door, and and said, "So-and-so, can we talk? I'm concerned. You're coming through more and more drunk in mid-afternoon, what's going on?" And he started to cry. I'm a touchy-feeling, hopefully in appropriate ways, person that, reached out and put my hand on his leg, and then he kind of reached out almost like, he needed a hug, and it seemed appropriate. I needed comfort, so I reached out and hugged him, and he starts to kind of, we were on his couch or love seat or whatever, and he starts to kind of fall over, which kind of leans me over, and so we're almost inclined on his couch, and he starts to rub my back. And looking back, thinking, well, I didn't get up right away. I mean, I guess I was shocked or whatever and didn't know what to do. I'm in my mid-20s, I should have known better. And then he said, and then eventually finally sat up and talked a little more, and he said, "Mike, thank you for caring." I thought, geez, I'm starting to reach him. I'm starting to feel good about that. And he says, not everyone would do that. And I've been hurting for a long time, and he would share different things. And then he said, I'd like you to go back to the I'd like to continue this on back in the bedroom. And I immediately, I guess it wasn't, I was shocked, but it wasn't horror. I think I pretty well, with control, got up and said, "I'm sorry, that's not where I'm at, and I need to leave." And it really didn't have an effect on me, I don't think. But it keeps coming up. It never goes away. And that was just a little brush. I cannot begin to imagine those who were truly abused, especially as children. I can't begin to imagine. It doesn't go away. And it comes up oftentimes when I'm listening to others. It's not that I'm trying to relate or that isn't the issue. It triggers something in me. That personal experience, it just does not go away. I think he's since left the priesthood. What bothered me is somewhat that Mike was getting at, that there was a second associate priest that was there, and I did tell him what happened. I didn't feel I could talk to the pastor. And I really did trust, and I continue to trust this person who has since left the priesthood for all good reasons. Whatever that means, he did tell the pastor, but the pastor never came to me. Never communicate how I was doing. Nor to say, he's getting help. This wasn't a surprise. And I since moved on from that, and I became a youth minister at a parish in Sheboygan in the late 80s. And I was there for 3 years, and a month or two after I had moved on to a different position, found out that the priest that was there, not the pastor, but the associate priest that was there, was arrested for abuse, sexual abuse of primarily teenage boys. And I remember, I liked the guy. I don't know that I would consider him friend, but I liked the guy. I got along okay with him, as I hope I do with most people. I remember calling and getting his answer machine. As soon as I heard that, I was still friends with people there, and they called me within a day. And I knew that calling there, I probably wouldn't get him, but hoping at some point he would hear this message, days, weeks, whatever that meant. my first response to him was, I care. As much as angry as I was about what happened, I'll explain a little how that affected me more personally. But there was a human being there that what he did didn't take away from that humanness. It scarred that humanness, I haven't seen him since, and I don't know that I could see him. It's fractured that, it's destroyed that. But there's still a humanness. I had to reach out and say I cared. And then I immediately went, damn, do you know that you were I had you on retreat, weekend retreats. And I thought to myself, did he abuse kids while on retreat with me, who I was directing of him? And I led my own retreats. And how that, and I feel bad saying this, but it's my story, but how bad I felt that he would drag me into a legal battle and legal liability.
I don't know where to start. I guess when I look back at my days in seminary, I was pretty naive. For all sorts of reasons. Shortly after I was ordained, I was involved in fondling some teens. And within a few days of that, it was known in the parish, and I had met with the parents and apologized to them and to the victims. And that's pretty much as far as it went. That was a long time ago, and probably a very different world. I guess what I find amazing in it is that I kept being a priest at that same place and served out a full term and went on to another place and served a full term. And it's only much later on that I ended up talking with the diocese and going away for some therapy. In coming back, I thought that things were taken care of, that everything was okay, that there had been a kind of process. I certainly discovered more about myself, a lot about myself. And continued to be a priest. I think one of the things that is hardest for me is to feel that there's been an attempt on the part of the institution to pretend that I don't exist, to take out a big eraser and make folks like me all disappear.
Why is I, as a priest in the parishes, before being assigned to the office work, missed it, didn't get it, don't get it, in a sense, you know? Are there other priests out there, I will ask myself, or others around, parishioners around, who don't quite understand what's the problem? What's going on? Isn't this... Here's the insight that it's meaningful to me. It's quite meaningful to me, actually. Every human being is made up of good and not good. We do good, and we also at times do not good. The good is generally done in the open. The light is on it. People can see it. I like to talk about the good that I do. We all are like that. The evil that is done tends to be done in darkness. It's hidden. I don't like to talk about what I do wrong. No one does. It's a mystery. Leave it alone. Shh. I believe it's quite possible that in many of the cases of sexual abuse by clergy of a minor, there might be only two people on the face of the earth who know the truth of the situation: the priest and the victim. No one else. A reality in life, a defense that we might all like to use, I believe it might be referred to as a form of manipulation, is the, how can you think bad of me? Look at all the good I do. And I think that is a player in our situation today. On the review board, as we will be reviewing cases of sexual abuse, we might very well receive letters from a variety of parishioners. How can you possibly think bad of our pastor? Look at all the good that Father has done. And they will itemize. And those people are speaking 100% truth. That person, that priest, actually has done all that good. But that's not the question at hand. The question at hand is, in addition to being the person of the truth, is there also the dark side that can be so dark that this abuse could be taking place? And so the fact that many will say, how dare you think that of our pastor, doesn't move the truth. The truth is, it still could be going on. And I think until we create the environment in the church, in the society at large, so that we truly can allow the voice of the truth from the one person to rise above the truth of the thousands, so that that truth of the darkness can be made known, we will not find solution. We will not find real solution.
This is where I sat during the Restorative Justice Circle. As I listened to the stories, I thought about how many people had suffered because of what had happened. Well, many people don't know any victims personally. Everyone has been affected in some way. In fact, I know many people who say the scandal has tested their faith. That's why I asked two friends of mine to join the circle. Joanne is a lawyer and someone I work with. She is the mother of 4 children. Her mother and grandmother raised her in the Catholic faith, a faith, she says, she lost to the scandal. Sue is a lifelong Catholic. She says she was raised in a more innocent time. But the church she grew up in is not the same church her 5 children have come to know. And while her faith has been challenged, she believes the church can get stronger. These two women represent two different generations of Catholics. Their stories are the final segment of our tape. They are here to help us consider the ways in which we have been affected, the ways in which our faith has been shaken, and our trust tested.
I'm almost 45 years old. I have 4 kids. And I spent most of my life as what would be called a fall-away Catholic. I was raised Catholic. I have a very devout grandmother. I was telling John I went to St. Mary's Academy, which is the School of Sisters of St. Francis. Astonishingly wonderful group of women who I pretty much owe a gratitude for who I am. But I struggled most of my life with my Catholicism because I disagreed with a lot of the tenets of the church. But I always came back to it because it gave me comfort. It was what I knew. It was familiar. I had a lot of good connections to it. And I could reconcile my differences, the things that I didn't agree with, my cafeteria-style approach to being a Catholic. And I struggled with it more when I became a mom because I wanted to give my children faith. But I wasn't sure how to convey that without being hypocritical. I probably over-intellectualized it, which made it more difficult. If I would just be more faithful and take it, it would probably be easier, but that's really not my approach to the world. So I've struggled with my kids, and I've tried to teach them to be good Christians because I'm not really sure how to teach them to be good Catholics. And when this all came out, it was, for me, kind of the crushing blow, and I just thought, I can't do this. I can't continue to support or even try and support the Catholic Church because I couldn't safely feel comfortable to put my children in the Catholic Church because the church consciously exploited children and knew about it. And it was for me, that was the end of my ability to be a good Catholic or a Catholic at all. And I was okay with that. I was still, I think, a good Christian. I try and give my children good Christian values. And I think the hardest thing for me was last year, my grandmother, who is 97 years old and a very devout Catholic, the Keys to the Church Catholic. Her parish, I can't even think of the name of it, in Bayview, she went to forever, Immaculate Conception. I mean, literally had the keys to the church. If she wasn't home, I'd find her there. She was always doing something there. Went to church every day. When she couldn't go to church any longer because of her failing health, she took communion every day at her assisted living facility. Last year when she was in the hospital, I went to visit her and I saw one of the ecumenical ministers in the hallway and I asked her if she wanted me to get them to bring her communion. And she said, "No, honey, I'm done." And I thought that meant she had taken communion for the day. And I said, "Oh, when did they come in?" I just saw them coming onto the floor. And she said, "They didn't come in." And I said, "Well, I don't understand." And she said, "I'm done taking communion. I can't take communion anymore." And I was just floored. This is she was the one thing that kept me going back. Because for her, she could always go back. And she said, "I can't do it. This was it for me." And for me, that was very sad. And I'm not directly affected other than it's destroyed my faith. And that's huge.
I'm a lifelong Catholic. I've gone to Catholic school since I was 3 years old. Went all through Catholic school, and boy, was I naive. We lived in this little bubble back in the 50s and 60s where we were told what to do and what the church was, and they always told us that there were 3 choices in life. You could either be single or married or become a religious. And they always made the religious way outshine any other way of life. The priests and religious were bigger than life. They were our role models. They were the answers to everything. And quite honestly, that made it easier for those of us who weren't religious because we just depended on what they said. We didn't have to make decisions. We didn't have to question. We just did. And so a little bit, maybe it's our fault that situations went the way they did because we took so much for granted. Flip forward to my life today, I have 5 grown children. I don't know how I would have reacted if one of my sons had been violated. I look at them today, and the Catholic Church that they believe in is something totally separate from their lives. They aren't Catholic today. I still feel that I am, and I think there's a lot to believe in. I think that the church is going to be better in the long run at some point. There's going to be a generation that's missing. I just hope somehow in the end that we all survive and that we all get to heaven. And
it was a privilege for me to facilitate the circle that took place in this room with the people whose stories you have just heard. I want to thank you for joining us for this extraordinary dialogue. In a moment, you'll be asked to share your story, the story of how you've been affected by the scandal, and what steps you think should be taken to support the restoration of faith. I hope you'll discuss your hopes for the future and your ideas for creating the kind of environment where people are protected and healed. That's the basis of restorative justice, a belief that there is healing where faith, hope, and love meet. Thank you for your time and participation, and good night.
Thank you to all those who participated in the making of this video, especially the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, for its collaboration and unwavering support for this project. Special thanks to the Most Reverend Archbishop Timothy M. Dolan and Amy Peterson of the Office of Sexual Abuse Prevention and Response Services for the Milwaukee Archdiocese. Contact information for services available to anyone suffering from the aftermath of abuse is included on the resources page of our website, healingcirclegroup.com.